Okay, so welcome everybody to another fantastic ACO meeting. Mariana and I are happy to reintroduce Dana Maier, who was the previous presenter on January 7th. She is a New Yorker cartoonist and online contributor, and she has a book coming out actually next month. So I encourage you all to take a look through the archives of the ACO and revisit her meeting. Of course, you can access that from the archives on the webpage. And she will be introducing and hosting today's meeting with Erin Fostel. Dana?
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Dana. Thank you, Jordan. And I'm so happy to introduce Erin. We went to Micah together. We were both in the same drawing classes, and so I've admired her work for forever, basically. So I'm just going to give you some information about Erin. Let's see. In 2004, she received a BFA in drawing from the Maryland Institute College of Art. Her work has been featured in group and solo exhibitions, both in the Mid-Atlantic region and nationally. She's a past winner of the Maryland State Arts Council Individual Artist Award and Municipal Art Society of Baltimore City Travel Prize. And I believe you have a drawing in the permanent collection of the Baltimore Museum of Art, right, Erin?
Yeah.
Pretty storied career, and and I can't wait to see your presentation and hear more. So take it away.
Cool. Thank you. It's really great to be here today. I do have to start by saying that my last name is pronounced Fostel. I am really bad at correcting people on that, so I'm trying in 2023 to be like, it's Fostel. Yeah, it's a French, so you got to pretend there's like extra letters there on the end. But I'm really excited to be here today. I'm going to pop up my presentation here. All right. So I was just telling the folks before I started that today I'm going to try to read my notes so that I give you an organized presentation of what I'd like to talk to you about. But hopefully it doesn't feel too much like I'm sort of like just like talking at you. But yeah, so today I'm going to sort of go through several bodies of work that I've done, starting all the way back at my college days when Dana and I were hanging out together at Micah. As Dana said, I graduated from Micah in 2004 with a degree in drawing and a minor in art history. I went to Micah to get a degree in illustration, which I think is how Dana and I maybe first met, maybe in like an illustration class. But I switched over to a drawing degree because I really felt like I didn't have enough skill at the time. I didn't come from like a magnet art school. And I really wanted to focus on technique. And so I switched over to a drawing degree where I could focus on drawing. I had become enamored with charcoal in life drawing classes. It's the medium that you use as you're learning to draw in the classical representational manner. And I loved it so much that I just kept using it. I love the simplicity of the materials. I literally draw with burnt sticks of wood, and I get a very tactile experience of using my hands as I'm drawing directly on the surface. Using these burnt sticks and my fingers and various types of erasers, I'm able to create illusions on paper. And 20 years into it, I still love it. It's great. All of the drawings I've made, even since college, relate to my life experience over the years. I used to think that I just moved from project to project with my interests just shifting, but really everything has been a reflection of something that I was going through at the time. From concerns of identity to grappling with loss, I seem to channel all of it into the drawings that I make. I think there's a quote from someone who I can't remember where it came from, but it's the story an artist has to tell is one of their own life. And my experiences are personal to me, but also shared with the many. And I'm fortunate that the work that I've made over the years has really resonated with a lot of folks. The image that I have on the screen right now is the only landscape that I'm going to show you in the presentation today, but it's just sort of my starting image. All right. How do I go next? There we go. All right, so I'm going to start all the way back with my BFA work. these are the drawings that I did during my senior thesis project at MICA. I was about to exit the bubble of college and enter into the real life world of being an artist. I was very consumed with thoughts about my identity, not just as a person finally exiting school and entering into adulthood, but also my identity as an artist and what I wanted that to look like. The thing that I had intended to study at MICA was book illustration, as I had always loved a good story. I channeled this love of narrative and explored the idea of identity by transforming into characters from familiar stories. I would dress in costumes and pick a pivotal point in a character's plotline and put myself in their place. I was aiming to see how I'd feel at these moments, and each drawing captures my particular reaction. With Snow White, for instance, which is on the left here, for some reason, I really aggressively wanted to bite that apple. With Salome, I was feeling a lot of dark pride in having a man who had rejected me beheaded. A little fun side note about this particular drawing is that the head of John the Baptist belonged to my boyfriend at the time, who is now my ex-husband. So when I look at this drawing, I get to see my ex-husband beheaded, which is just a little fun dark note. I couldn't tell you the exact sizes of these pieces. I probably wrote it down someplace on a computer that I've lost over the years, unfortunately, but all of the figures are larger than life-sized. I was in the mindset of trying to claim space and grab attention, and so I made the work as large as I could. The piece on the left is inspired by Bram Stoker's Dracula, where I played the role of Dracula's love interest, and in this role I was feeling very wary of such attention. The piece on the right is me playing the role of Okichi, who was a geisha ordered by the Japanese government to serve under the first American consul. She became shunned because of her association with a foreigner, and she drowned herself. I borrowed a kimono from a teacher at school, and when I put it on and thought of Okichi, I was pissed off, and that anger is visible. After making these pieces, I left school feeling very confident, especially since I sold most of these right after I graduated. For the first body of work after I graduated, I was interested in continuing to work with the figure, but I didn't want the burden of the narrative. I decided to simplify and do an exploration of light and pattern. Again, all of these pieces are about life size. There was also a short change in materials. The works that I was showing you previously were drawn on paper, specifically Reeves BFK paper. And these pieces are drawn on muslin, which is a very soft type of cotton. Working with paper, I quickly learned after graduating, is an exhibition challenge. Things need to be framed to be presentable and protected. I quickly learned how expensive this is, and so I experimented with drawing on stretched muslin, which I could put right up on the wall like a painting. After making these pieces, I ended up deciding to go back to paper because of the limitation of not being able to erase on the fabric. As you'll see at the end of my presentation, about 15 years later, I returned to this material again to sort of expand on getting past the limitations of the paper itself. And I've discovered that my temperament has changed. So even though I still can't erase, some reason I'm okay with that. Having been out of school for several years and figuring out how to successfully balance making art and making a living, which honestly still trying to do, I started to feel a little beat down. To handle these feelings, I decided to make work about play and about how I remember as a child that the act of play was so consuming that it would transform the world around me. So I set up two errands, one real and one imaginary, in some scenario where reality becomes altered to meet the fictional act. These pieces were really fun to do as they required some problem solving on how to stage reference photos to make the scenes look realistic. Either making or sourcing the costumes proved to be a particular enjoyment. Like I got to make cardboard robot costumes. That was, as like my job kind of, and that was just a really fun thing to do. These pieces in particular are very large because this is 2 panels of BFK rolls next to each other. So each piece is 42.5 inches wide, and it works as a diptych side by side. And then some really hard shit happened. In late 2014, my father passed away, and I was suddenly extremely heartbroken. And all of the work that I had done previously with figures and play and narrative just sort of sunk away as just something that was just not relatable. As a way to cope with the continuing grief that I was feeling, I needed to make work that helped to get me through that experience. I began to draw portraits of buildings around Baltimore as a way to commemorate my dad. He had been an architect, and throughout my life had been pointing out buildings to me and encouraging me to think about their construction and their purpose. I found myself wandering around the city on foot or on bike or in my car, just looking for places that really spoke to me. I was looking for something that essentially could function as a container for the grief that I was feeling. Each building that I came across that felt like it served this purpose was one that I would photograph and come home and draw. Charcoal is an inherently moody medium. I mean, it's black and white. It can get really dark. And in these pieces, I was really increasing that moodiness by pushing the tonal values further, making those blacks even darker, and making those transitions of gray smoother and smoother. I was not interested in drawing the buildings with total accuracy. Sometimes I would, simplify shape or remove detail. Like, I'm trying to show you the building, but not give you like a portrait of the space. I'm just trying to capture the feeling of the space. And that to me didn't mean that it required full accuracy of that space itself. As I was making these drawings, my mom was sorting through my dad's things. There were 67 years of things to sort through, going all the way back to his baby shoes. As my mom and my brother and I were looking through all his stuff, I realized that everything he left behind was an archive of his life. I decided to put these objects on display in an exhibition next to my drawings. And here on the left, you actually see a black and white drawing on the wall there. And that's a portrait that I did of my father, I think, in my sophomore year at Maier. And that ended up going into the exhibition as just sort of the beginning part of the portion that focused on him. The things that were displayed were a mixture of personal items like his beret and a favorite tie, along with drawings he made in high school, and then architectural designs from college and his professional years as an architect. Seeing his drawings on the wall next to mine was wild for me, as it was very apparent that I had inherited the type of style that I work in. He favored representational style that required deep observation, and so do I. As I was making the drawings, I knew that nothing in them indicated to you, the viewer, that these pieces were about my dad. As a way to try to integrate him more into the work, I started to include phrases that I had pulled from his college notebooks. Again, he had 67 years of things that he didn't throw out. So he had his college notebooks, his high school notebooks, he had all of it. But in the classes where he was learning how to be an architect, he would jot down short statements, and I would occasionally put these into a drawing when I felt that the phrase matched the building. So for instance, at the bottom of this one, it says, "Just list possibilities and their combinations." And that was just a phrase of words that he had jotted down on a page in a notebook. I started to become interested in leaving parts of the drawing unrendered. I do not consider my work photorealistic, but on occasion it would be mistaken as such. And by leaving areas undone, I was hoping to keep the viewer inside the realm of the drawing. As I got further along in the series, I started to pull back the view so that the drawings were not just about a building, but also a place. I wasn't trying to draw the touristy areas of the city, the kinds of views that would be recognizable or even more celebrated. I wasn't trying to draw just the derelict parts. I was just trying to respond to the thing that filled the need that I had. Baltimore is home to me, but this project really allowed me to explore a place I thought I was familiar with and discover new things or even old memories. It gave me opportunities that I would not have had otherwise, such as a tugboat ride around the harbor. I was able to see things like the cargo cranes from a new perspective. And being so close to these particular objects, I really got to understand just how massive and large they are. Usually my experience of seeing them had been from the highway as I was driving past on 95. But being in a boat right below them, they were just these monstrous structures. And I really wanted to capture that sense of scale in a drawing. Many people told me that they were delighted to recognize a building that I had drawn, and they would share with me their own memories of time spent in or around it. With this project, I learned that we each have a very personal relationship with public space. I was also told by folks that I influenced the way that they began to perceive the city around them, that they had more awareness and were paying more attention to what they were seeing. This is when I realized that what I draw can have an impact beyond the drawing itself. It was it's a pretty powerful series for me to work on in that sense. Right. After spending about 3 years drawing Baltimore and working entirely with public space, I knew that I wanted to shift my focus to private interiors. At the time, I was thinking of what to draw. I was watching a friend on Instagram settle herself into a new home after a divorce. I was witnessing her reclaiming both her space and her spirit. And I realized that I had witnessed this many times with different friends, and that I also had been through that experience myself. This friend had posted images of herself in her bedroom at night under the moonlight, and I was captivated by the imagery. I asked her if I could draw her room, and she said yes. And so this is her room. After creating that first drawing, I put it on social media and I asked for volunteers. I wanted to see if any other ladies would let me draw their bedroom. I had no idea if anyone else would be interested because it's a really intimate thing. It's a really intimate space, and it's a really intimate thing to just have somebody come into your room and start photographing it to draw. But after I posted this on social media, I was inundated with requests. I was clearly working with something that resonated with a lot of women. The figure is not present in these images. Objectification and expectation are imposed upon women almost everywhere else in her life. And I really wanted to represent her through her space rather than her body. I created a series of rules for the project. Each bedroom must belong to only one woman, and that's anyone who identifies as a woman. But this is her space entirely. She does not share it with anyone else. Each drawing is also anonymous. Nothing in the room would identify who it belongs to, and I never share location or information that would help identify the woman as well. There is safety in that anonymity, and that is a really important part of the project. Each drawing is about 11 by 15 inches in size. I was interested in gathering a quantity of these pieces, and so I needed to keep them small so that I could ensure a quick enough production. But I also wanted the physical intimacy that you would feel as you had to go up to the drawings and get really close to them in order to see all of the details. So scale felt really important in sort of like driving home that sense of intimacy. These are tighter drawings than my usual style, but I'm trying to do diligence to the items and to everything that's in the room. I'm trying to represent that space fully, as it is a representation of the woman herself. So even though these drawings are pretty small, they got real tight and real rendered in a rather unexpected way. I think prior to these, I was not as tight of a renderer. I don't edit anything out of the room. What is there is what I draw. And sometimes that's a lot of stuff. Sometimes there's a repetition of things like Venetian blinds. And I'm definitely not interested in drawing Venetian blinds anymore after working on this project. But it was a real joy, and there was some trepidation when I would go into a room of someone who I didn't know, and I didn't know what to expect of what was there. But it was so wonderful how different each room was and how much of a representation of each woman each room was. Towards the middle of the project, cats started appearing in the drawings. A cat might have always been there, sort of hiding under the bed or in a closet or wherever, but they never made it into the photograph because they weren't interested. But all of a sudden, they were on the bed and they were like, I am here, this is my room. And so I started to have to draw them because I can't edit out a cat. A cat is very much a part of the feeling of a room. And so I wanted to keep them in there. So I found myself drawing cats along with these rooms. Viewers are always telling me that they know what age a woman is or some other defining fact about her based on the contents of her room. And 99% of the time they are wrong. Working on this series has really taught me about the assumptions and judgments that we make about other people just based on their stuff. I did start to work larger than the 11 by 15 inch scale. When I visited this particular room, next to the bed, there is a reproduction of Judith slaying Holofernes, which is a move. That is a move to have that painting next to your bed. But I knew that when I saw this painting on the wall, that this drawing had to be larger than normal because I wanted that painting to be recognizable. And so I had to draw the drawing large enough so that you could see what that painting was. And so sometimes what the contents of the room were started to dictate what the scale became. In early 2022, I was invited to create a piece for a show titled More Than Shelter at the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art. Invited artists were asked to partner with an organization and create work that revolved around the theme of shelter. I had been wanting to transition my bedroom series to include transitional spaces for women in need. And I was introduced to the YWCA of Southampton Roads, who run an emergency shelter for women and families escaping domestic and sexual violence. After I passed an interview, which I didn't realize was kind of an interview as I was having it, but they were making sure that I was an okay person to welcome into this space. But I passed and I was invited down to photograph an empty room. But just prior to my scheduled visit, a woman had abruptly vacated her space and she left a bunch of belongings behind. And the YWCA allowed me to photograph the room along with all of her belongings. After having so many conversations with people about assumptions about room occupants, I found myself working through judgments and ideas about who this woman was and where she went. With all the bedrooms that I had drawn, even if I did not know the woman and was meeting her for the first time as I was photographing her room, I still had the opportunity to meet her and interact. And here she was entirely anonymous, even to me. She left behind clothes, wigs, beauty products, and I began to question why she didn't need this stuff anymore. When I began the drawing, I was worried that perhaps she had gone back to the harmful situation she had been in, and she wasn't allowed to dress how she wanted there. But as I finished the piece, I decided that she only needed these things when she was staying at the shelter because she needed to change her appearance and be in disguise. And she left it behind because she moved on to a safer place where she didn't need it. None of us will know her story, and we will all make assumptions and judgments about her situation. It's human to do so. But I hope that by considering her and giving her space and time in our minds, we are collectively developing a deeper sense of empathy for those like her, those in need of assistance and shelter. This is a photo taken at the reception for the show. These are the women of the YWCA that invited me to work with them. And I show this just so you can also get a sense of the scale of the piece. It's sized at 58 inches by 90 inches and is drawn to scale if you stand about 4 feet away from it. To make this work, I knew it needed to be large. I needed it to command your attention. And the paper that I usually work on is 42.5 inches wide. And that wasn't going to work for this particular piece. So this project is what brought me back to working on muslin, which I can scale up in a somewhat infinite manner because it comes very, very wide. And so I went back to working on the muslin for this particular drawing. And it turned out that my temperament had changed. Even though I can't erase, I'm cool with that. I just work a little bit slower than I used to. The drawing is also partially unrendered. And this is done in the spirit of aiding the concept that the room is meant to be temporary. The drawing itself appears to be in transition, just like the woman it is representing. And the title of this piece is Room Number 3, May 12th, 2022, YWCA Southampton Roads Emergency Shelter. So it gives a place and a date to when my photograph was taken. Okay. In the middle of the women's bedroom project, COVID happened, and I was not able to go and continue to gather photographs for a few years. And so just like everyone else who was stuck at home, I began to deeply observe elements of my own home environment. At the very beginning, I became obsessed with how the sun moved through the house each day. I started to gather photos of the shadows and the sun shapes that I witnessed. I had wanted to make drawings of them, but the timing didn't feel right at first. I took photos for a year and I gathered over 100 of them before the drawings began. In the spring of 2021, I had the unfortunate experience of a miscarriage, and this would be the catalyst for the creations of the drawings. To help cope with such a sad experience, I needed to make something beautiful. As I was choosing which photos and shadows I wanted to draw, I realized I was interested in the idea of in-betweenness. There are things that are real and discernible in objects present in each image, and there are things outside of the frame that are only known through the blocking of light and the creation of shadow. Each one is drawn to scale, in that it is the size that the shadow occurred in my home. I was definitely busting out the measuring tape to make sure that I was getting them just right. I initially created 4 pieces. You just saw morning, midday, and afternoon, and this is evening. The idea was to capture a full day's experience of how the light shifted through my home. And this piece, Evening, is the one that the Baltimore Museum of Art just acquired, which is very exciting. I was given an opportunity to show them in an artist-run space that is literally a shed in an artist's backyard, not that far away from me here in Baltimore. It's a great space that the artist set up as a way to socially distance and still see art. You signed up on a calendar and you got a private viewing of the art that was in there. I think throughout the time that she had this, that she was using the space, she probably had up maybe 6 or 7 shows of work that were up for about a month. But for my show, keeping with the spirit of the drawings being at scale, I decided that I wanted to show them in relative position to where they had occurred. For instance, the morning shadow is the bottom section of a door, so it sits at the bottom of the wall. And then the midday piece is a view of the floor, and so it was sitting on the floor itself. A friend who had visited to see the show described the drawings as showing the things you cannot hold. And I still love that interpretation so much. It's just such a beautiful way to sort of think about what I was trying to capture. I realized that the 4 pieces that I'd made were not enough. So I ended up continuing the series to create 10 more. I became really fascinated by how the quick action of taking the photo of the shadow, which was a really particular experience for me. Like these shadows I would see them, and then if I didn't have my camera on me, I would run out of the room and come back and try to capture it. And sometimes the shadow would be gone by the time that I got back there. So I really had to be quick about capturing these as they were happening. And they never happened the same way twice. Each day it would be a little bit different because the sun is moving a little bit. There's something else happening to affect like how it works. But I became a little bit too obsessed with photographing them, and to the point where I would just walk around my house with my camera, which is a little stressful. I just wanted to chill in my house, but I was just walking around constantly like looking around for these at a certain point. But that quickness that I needed in order to capture the photo was kind of juxtaposed against the slow process of making the drawing. And even though when I showed these pieces alongside the works of the women's bedrooms, everyone thought that the women's bedrooms were so technically proficient and like detailed, and they didn't understand that like these shadow drawings were 10 times harder to make than those bedrooms, because of the softness of that light and the softness of that transition of tonal values and charcoal. Like these were probably the most technically difficult drawings I've ever made. And I learned a lot from them as I was doing them. But each drawing has one or more elements that provide grounding to give you a sense of location, like a doorknob or the edges of Venetian blinds. This is crucial not only to the concept, as I want you to know like where these shadows occurred, but also to not get lost in the shadow itself, which can undulate with such an abstraction that your eye wouldn't have a place to rest. There was a necessary balance between both that sharpness and that softness. The final drawing that I did was of my studio wall, where I had made the majority of the pieces. This felt like a fitting end to the series and was really fun to recreate. And again, all of these are drawn to scale. So this is, you know, on your screen, you can't tell, but if you see this in person, it's literally, you know, like a representation of the wall that I would be standing at. So you can see like on the wall, because I'm making charcoal drawings on it, there's just smudges of charcoal everywhere. And so an act of making this drawing was just dirtying up my fingers and just going like this on the drawing itself, which was a very satisfying and unusual experience for me. But this drawing is also interesting in that it's the first time that I've put another one of my drawings into a drawing. I drew my own drawing, but there was just this little piece hanging next to the wall, which was a random thing that I had done as like an experiment. But it was very much related to a personal experience during my miscarriage. And so having that piece there really had a lot of meaning for me. And after creating this drawing, I ended up taking that, that little drawing down and finally putting it in my flat file. And now up to date, since I had worked on the muslin for the room that I did for the YWCA, I decided that I really want to explore drawing more on this material again. So right now I'm back to working on the muslin, but I'm also delving into some new territory of color. I am dyeing the muslin color and then drawing on top of it. This bedroom owner in particular, her room was a beautiful glow of pink when I went to photograph it. She had an LED light that was sort of running around the ceiling of the room. And when I walked into her room and I just saw how beautiful this glow was, a little part of me felt really bad about turning it into a black and white drawing. And I didn't. And I was just like, I'm going to hold on to this for a minute because I feel like one day I might want to put color in there, and I got to hold on that. And I'm glad I did, because then I started to work on this material that was a really easy way to add color, because when you dye muslin, it doesn't change the surface of it. It's as soft as it was when you first got it. On paper, if I tried to change the color of the paper, I would have been changing the surface of the paper. And I can't do that with the way that I was drawing on paper. That just messed up my process. But dyeing the fabric has become a really great way to start to introduce color into the work. But I had a really great conversation with this particular bedroom owner when she visited my studio about a month ago to see this piece in person. But she let me know that she lived in this room from her late teens to her early 20s. And she doesn't live there anymore. But this drawing for her has now become like a time capsule of a particular period of her life. And I really loved that I was able to make a drawing that just held so much for one person in particular. And there's just a detail shot of the wall. So many posters. I didn't count them, but there are so many posters on the wall. And I was drawing things that I didn't think I'd ever draw before. For instance, in this little poster here is a dog wearing a gas mask. Didn't think I'd ever draw that, but there it is. And then this is the latest of the ones that I've done. Both of these are 4 by 5 feet. So they're on the larger size again. I'm really enjoying the bigger space. After making drawings that were so small and intimate in scale for a while, I'm really enjoying making much larger pieces that command a lot more of your attention. And in this piece, I'm continuing to play around with the rendered and the unrendered, but here using it as more of a compositional element instead of conceptual. And here's just a detail of the floral bedding on that. One thing to note between the paperworks and the muslin works, I know this was a question that came up kind of in the very beginning, was if I spray my drawings. I never try to spray the works on paper. I used to work for an archival framer who basically taught me that you're putting a layer of plastic on this organic material, and that the best thing to do is to get your paper immediately into a frame, and then that was the protection for it. And so I rarely would spray a drawing on paper. But with these on muslin, I don't want to frame them. The great thing about them is that they are stretched on something that can go right on the wall. So I found myself now relying a little bit more on having to apply spray fixative to a surface to protect it. But so far it's been working pretty well. It doesn't change the surface of it. And I even did a little experiment to make sure that even if it's under bright sunlight for like 30 days, it doesn't do anything. So just a little technical note there. But that's my last slide as the end. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And hopefully I was somewhere around the time marker.
Yeah, perfect. Wow. Thank yeah, this was incredible. Thank you so much, Erin. Yeah, your work is so moving, and it reminds me of when I was, when we first were introduced to charcoal when you were studying, and like how magical it did seem at first, and I keep remembering like, oh yeah, this was something that made you realize like what an impact a drawing could actually have, and I don't know, and your work just like always reminds me of that, that first feeling of like seeing a charcoal drawing or using charcoal for the first time.
Nice.
Yeah, but yeah, no, this is yeah, I can't. I feel like I'm just gushing, but yeah, I can't tell you how much I love this. Yeah, of course. Let's see. So I'm curious. So I guess it's kind of a question, but you said something that surprised me earlier, which is that you were an art history minor, which I never realized. Can you talk about a little bit about like how that, like, you think that informs your work these days, if it does at all? Because I've been thinking more about art history kind of like the older I've gone, and I'm curious if you you know, if that still like goes, stuff that influenced you back then, like goes through your work now.
Yeah. I always like to just add that in there because even if it maybe doesn't necessarily fully impact what I'm done, I still took those extra credits and I got that minor. And so I leave it in there to be like, I did that.
Right.
But I don't know, because when I was at MICA, there was a really great teacher, Professor Elkington, who taught all things Japanese. And so I was just very in love with learning more about specifically Japanese art history. And so I have the minor, but really all of the extra classes I took to get that minor were in the Japanese art history. So I took like a tea making class. I can't remember the other names of the other classes, but it was such a specific sort of like section of art and culture and country to look at. But I feel you on me sort of looking back more now into the art history, because I took all those classes that MICA makes you take, like the intro, the prehistoric, but I took them out of order, and I think that really messed up my sort of ability to place things well. And a friend of mine a few years ago who felt that she didn't have a really good background in art history because she went to a liberal arts college and then went on to get her master's degree. She literally read the art history book that we read. What is it called? It's somewhere. It's not on my shelf at the moment, but it's the book that we all read, and she read it cover to cover. And I think it took her like maybe a year to do. And she was like, after doing that, she just felt like she had a better understanding of kind of like the flow of art history. And I was like, that's a crazy idea. I'm going to do that. And so I also then went and read the book cover to cover. And sometimes it was dry and not very interesting, but sometimes it was like really impactful. And I really got to understand like how art history teaches you also a lot about what was happening politically and environmentally in the world and how they all relate, and how it's just a greater way to understand like why things were happening and what was a response to that. And so I ended up doing that. And like, even though now I don't feel like my work is so specific, yes, Jansen, thank you. Even though now I don't feel like I'm like sort of looking back to particular artists or paintings in history, that knowledge is definitely in my brain, and I'm definitely pulling from it, even if I'm not fully aware of it. So I do think that like having an understanding of history is, kind of crucial to making work that feels valid in that span of the history as well as today.
Yeah, it kind of makes you think like, you're thinking of like the whole larger picture of like where does this stuff sit in the world. Yeah, somebody once described art history to me. It's like it teaches you how the world saw itself, and I always
exactly.
Yeah, and then that is how art kind of manifests itself. Let's see, and I guess I was also curious because your work is so much about like just like exploring spaces and other people's spaces or even your own space, and then I guess there's like this moment where you're like, I'm going to draw that, and you take a picture, or like something just kind of like speaks to you. Can you tell me more about like that moment? Like how do you know like this is it? This is what I want to devote like several months to capture.
Yeah, it's not an immediate like understanding. I think I don't work with a sketchbook. I'm not making like drawings from life. I'm not sort of like I'll do some art journaling every now and then, just so that when I go to write my artist statement, I've got something to formulate around, but I don't use a sketchbook actively. Instead, I kind of use my phone, and I have thousands of pictures on my phone. And if I come across something that I'm really drawn to, I'll take a picture of it. And then after so many times of maybe photographing like kind of the same sort of thing over and over again, I'll start to see the pattern. And I'll be like, oh, well, this seems to be a thing I'm really into. Maybe try to question why I'm into it. And then if it's a deep enough interest for me to spend a lot of time sort of like spending hours making drawings, and most of the time it's not. Most of the time I'm just like, this is a really cool thing. This is a really beautiful thing. But I definitely cannot make a drawing or a series of drawings unless I feel, this is going to sound so cheesy, but unless I feel incredibly passionate about that thing existing in the world. And it's just because my process is so slow and takes so much patience and energy. But I think that I don't know until I know.
Yeah, I have a question to kind of work with that. Like, how do you know? I mean, that is an impossible question, I think, actually, is how do you know what makes or will make a good drawing when you've just kind of already, it's already kind of pre-cropped in a photographic kind of sense? Like, are those your boundaries? Or can you tell, like, this is only going to be a good photograph, or there's so much information here that won't translate to being something other than a photograph? Like, how do you grapple with those thoughts and those decision making, you know, in the process?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I take a photo and the thing that really gives you information about what you're looking at is color. And if I go to change that into black and white, you don't see it the same way. And so I don't draw those images because I'm still working with black and white, and you're not going to get the same experience looking at that thing when you're looking at it through the lens of my drawing. And so sometimes there is the limitation of working in black and white specifically that I have to sort of like work with. But I do have a love-hate relationship with working from photos. I'm not a photographer. Like, I take photos with my camera phone because I am so opposed to learning the technical jibber jabber of like a digital camera, or even, you know, and I wouldn't spend time in a dark room learning, you know, the specifics of creating like a photo, because like, I don't want the photo. I want like a drawing of it. I really love the medium. But photography is a great tool, like especially for something like the shadow drawings. I couldn't create those works without the tool of the photograph. And so, and with the bedroom drawings, like I'm not going to spend a month or a few weeks in like a room drawing it. And so the photograph is a great tool for that. I have had many conversations with photographers who are just like, why don't you correct the perspective of things? Because things are like a little off kilter. And I'm always just like, I never thought about it because you know, it's what I see. It's like it kind of talks a little bit about how our relationship with like our understanding of reality at this point is kind of through the lens of photography. Like, we experience a lot of things through like the photo. And so I think like in some really bizarre way, sometimes things appear more realistic if it has kind of that weird skewing in it. But yeah, but I think right now I am really conscientious of like how I am using the photograph. And I don't know if I'm in like a transitional phase where I'm trying to figure out a new way of using it, or if I am maybe one day going to be venturing away from using photography as a tool and trying to figure out how to build back into my practice more of a life drawing, because photographs are limiting. Like, my eyes are exponentially better at seeing something than my iPhone or even a fancy camera. And so that limitation is becoming something that I'm kind of like butting up against. But I don't yet know how that will present itself in my work in the future. But I'm excited to find out. I think it'll be real interesting.
Yeah, I guess a kind of follow-up question when you mentioned the idea of color, and as a black and white artist, it has to be kind of a love-hate relationship with color and how that creates your image or the lack of color. I mean, you've already kind of moved into this kind of world where a monochrome, like an overlay of a pink or green, is kind of embedded in the muslin, which is absolutely stunning, by the way. But do you have like this desire, or does it, or do you ever just like say, God, I'd love to have just like a pastel, just throw that in there and see what happens? Like, is there any kind of desire for color, or are you just okay with it being forever a minimalist in terms of color world?
I don't think I ever want full color. I think that I love black and white. Like when I look to art that inspires me the most, it's like black and white photography, because there's just something magical, as Dana was kind of talking about before, it's just like it's not like full reality because it's the color's been stripped away and most of us can see color. So there's something about it that kind of gives it like a magical, almost surreal kind of like otherworldly feeling. And I love that. But color is a great help in sort of like adding to a piece. And it is something that like I feel like I come back to every now and then where I'm just like, do I need some color? Maybe I don't. And so over the years, I just kind of play around with it. But I will say that if it's not color that I've been thinking about recently, as a thing to change to, I definitely think about painting a lot, because I make drawings, but they're essentially paintings. I used to correct people when they told me that I was a painter, and I was like, no, 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 I'm a drawer. I make drawings because I'm using charcoal, which is a drawing material. But I am making paintings. Like I'm making something that is a final piece of work that you would associate with a painting. Like I'm not sketching, I'm not, making, something that is a preparation for something else. And especially now that I'm on muslin and I'm stretching things over a stretcher bar, I'm really in the world of like painting. But I'm not, because painting, I feel like would make my life so much easier sometimes, because painting is an additive process, and my work in that like I can add a light on top of the dark, and I can push and pull with that as much as I want to create imagery. Sometimes I feel like I'm making things way harder for myself than necessary, because my brightness is always the surface underneath. It's what I'm starting with. And I play around a little bit with white right now, but not in the light sense, more as like almost like an additive of color. But I really feel like I'm doing things backwards sometimes, because I'm just like, I have to very slowly play around with building up this, surface of charcoal layer by layer to essentially, reproduce something that if I was making a painting, I just put a mark and a mark and a mark. And definitely painting is not easy, not saying that at all. But I just feel like making it with charcoal is just like a little too hard sometimes. And so sometimes I'll look at paintings, whether they're in color or black and white, and I'll just be like, God, that looks so great. Like that would just be such a lovely thing to do, instead of like struggling with like putting a mark down, not putting it down, like really slowly building it up. So yeah.
And that's a good point that you're saying that, as a drawer, especially with charcoal, you're like, as a painter, our goal is always to paint light. Like we go after the feel of light, the temperature of light. And so we're thinking about adding light. But as a drawer, your mindset, I imagine, is mostly in the I am capturing shadow, which is almost the exact opposite.
Yep.
Is there like that feeling that it's almost, I can't be like Hopper, I can't be like, Sergeant, because they're after light. I'm more in the deeper, darker dungeons of drawing or something. Does that bother you, or change what you think at all?
It doesn't bother me, but I definitely, I think that for me, that's a little bit more exciting. It's more exciting to be sort of in the darkness of it and then trying to like hold on to the lightness rather than building in the other way. And, I love Hopper. Like Hopper's pieces are beautiful, especially his drawings. But I could never draw like Hopper. Like he draws like a painter draws. And I draw in this way that is like, not at all with painting in mind, because I'm not a painter. Like I literally have painted only the amount that Micah forced me to paint when I was there as a student. which was like painting 101. And that was it, because I hate paint. I don't like it. It moves around, it changes, it's frustrating. Charcoal stays the same. But it's like I can tell when I'm looking at a drawing if it was made by a painter, because there's a very specific way that y'all are like putting those marks down. And I feel like that's not at all how I draw. I draw in a very strange other way that I'm not sure why, but yeah.
Trisha, you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I wanted to make a comment if it's appropriate now. I just want to say, Erin, your work is fascinating. It's very impressive. It's both, even your small pieces, they're both monumental and exquisite at the same time. And it reminds me of Ansel Adams, because the range of darks and grays to light that you have is just unbelievable. It's really, really impressive. And you just have a great career ahead of you, I'm sure. I can't imagine how you do the large pieces, because I can't imagine working that big and being able to visualize the whole thing. But it's wonderful. I've really enjoyed. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you. I can't believe that my name was in a sentence with Ansel Adams. That means a lot to me, because he's definitely an artist who I look to for inspiration in tonal values, because his photographs are just stunning. But yeah, the larger pieces definitely take a lot of patience and commitment, because they take me so long to do. Like the pink one and the green one, I think each took me about a month to do. And I work full time as an artist, so I'm at my wall drawing like all day long. And like I have to try to envision it finished in order for me to really stand there and keep going. Because if I can envision it finished, then I can keep at it and just slowly build up, and then I'll feel the satisfaction when I get to the end.
And I had just one question about the muslin. Muslin's so soft, and it seems to me like it's stretchy a little bit. Do you have something, you put it on a board to work?
I stretch canvas over the stretcher bars, and then I will put on some layers of gesso just so I can get that canvas to be like as taut as possible. And then I will stretch the muslin on top of that. That gives it good stability, because you're right, the muslin it's a little bit stretchy, and it's also a very thin material. And so having the canvas there gives it a good sort of like still soft, has some give to it underneath of like my sticks and pencils, but wouldn't be as hard as if it was a panel. So yeah, definitely good question. If you know the material, you're like, how is that working out?
Well, you're a great problem solver. You see some challenge and you work out some way to accomplish what's in your mind. It's really impressive.
Thanks. I will credit Micah with that, because I feel like Micah was a good series of 4 years of like, what am I doing? And then you just sort of figure it out for 4 years. And so even in my previous day job, where I was doing something entirely unrelated to art, I really felt like how do you do this? Let's just try something sort of approach that Micah taught me just applies to so many aspects of life. So yeah, it's a good thing that Micah gave me.
Looks like we have a question from Corey. Hi, Corey. So do you miss the playfulness of your early work? Or are you more fulfilled with the depth of your current work?
Corey would ask that question. Hi, Corey. I don't think I miss it, because I think that I made that work when I was in that place at that time, and it was exactly what I needed then. And the work that I'm making now is just what I need now. And so, as I was saying, like the things that I'm working on are just like a reflection of what I need. I think that I don't miss it. I'm just like, I'm glad that I did that work, and I'm glad it's out in the world. And I'm glad that I'm working on what I'm doing now, and it's feeling important to me, relevant. But also I get to put that playfulness and other aspects aside from the work. So I still keep playful even in all my seriousness now.
Oh, go ahead. Barbara.
It would be fascinating to see you working and your progress. I'm assuming that you just do one piece at a time. I know painters might put up a bunch of canvases and, but I'm assuming that you're working one at a time. Have you ever thought of making, this is terrible, a time-lapse video of how your work progresses from, day to day? It would be so interesting.
Yeah, I've definitely thought about it, but I just don't have like the technology figured out for how to like set it up, and it would need to be like in the same spot for like a long period of time. But I've had a really funny conversation with my friend and fellow artist Jackie Malad before about what we each must look like in our studios as we're creating work. And as you would imagine from my work, like I'm just standing at a wall, just very slowly making marks. I step back, I look at it, I come back forward. Like it's a very quiet kind of like calm experience. But my friend Jackie, who makes work that's like has a lot of collage, has a lot of mark making. She cuts up her other like old pieces of drawings and puts them together. Like she's called herself like a monster in her studio, and she's just like running around picking pieces up here, taping it up, cutting this, doing that. And I've always thought that it would be such a great side by side of the two of us working in our studio spaces. Because it is really interesting, like what we look like as we are, making the work, and how that speaks so much to what the work ends up looking like. But in regards to like how many pieces I work on at once, I love working on more than one at a time, because sometimes I lose the ability to really see a piece and I need to step away from it and come back. But I found that like with the larger pieces, I've just been really pressing forward to finish them because I just want them to exist. And so those I tend to just like work on and just like focus on that for like the entire period of time, and then finish it and then go and start the next one.
So some of those bedroom pieces, the smaller ones, you might have several on the wall to work on.
Those, because they're fairly quick, like if the room didn't have a ton of stuff in it, I'd be able to do like one of those a week. And so those I could sit down and I could sort of work through, and my eyes didn't feel like I needed a rest from them. But sometimes if I came across one, like I drew one that had 3 sets of windows with Venetian blinds in them, and I was like going like cross-eyed looking at it. And so that one I put aside several times because I was just like, I can't. And so then I would just go work on something else and then go back and sort of be like, okay, let me draw 4 more blades on this Venetian blind. And then, so it's more from like a temperament perspective sometimes as well.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, did you have
I do. This is unbelievably moving, Erin. You really reignited my interest in drawing.
Excellent.
Tremendously. Thank you. And I wanted to ask you, could you tell us a little bit about what you have around you when you draw? Like, powdered charcoal, sticks of charcoal, vine, compressed. And also, what do you prefer nowadays after having done so much muslin and paper? Where do you think you're preferring to go now in the future?
Yeah. So I know a few fellow charcoal drawer painter people who make representational work that use powdered charcoal and paintbrushes. And I don't do that. I've never been into powdered charcoal, and I've already railed against painting here, so I'm not going to hold a paintbrush. But I'm a lover of the sticks and the pencils. And the sticks I have, I have like the willow stick box that, we all would get when we were drawing in life drawing classes, but I was gifted a box of sticks that I'm still working with that is a variety of sizes. And so there's thin sticks, thick sticks, you know, different sort of ones that, you know, if you draw, like feel very different in your hand as you're using them and as you are sort of like moving it across the paper. I also use compressed charcoal, and my favorite brand is Alpha Color. I know there's a few different brands out there, but even though Alpha Color is like the cheapest of the brands, whatever is the binding agent that they put in there is my preferred tone. Like if you were to see a lot of charcoal with a binding next to each other, they vary in warmth. Some could be cool and some could be warmer. And I just love that the Alpha Color is just a little bit warmer than the coolness of a regular, or I guess a different kind of binder. But this does mean that when I'm working with both like a stick that's just literally a burnt stick of wood along with the compressed, that I have to blend those two together enough so that you don't see something cool next to something warm. And so I'm constantly sort of working everything together at the same time. I'm also a huge fan of chamois cloths. I have at all times like 2 to 3 of them in various degrees of dirtiness. And so I use that as a way, if I am not using just my fingers to really push the charcoal into the paper, because I'm 100% a smudger. I am smudging the shit out of that charcoal into the paper. And so it's a very specific process of pushing it in. I will use the chamois cloth to help assist with that pushing in and that smoothing around. And so there are those. And then the paper that I work with is specifically Reeves BFK. And this paper, you will love it or you'll hate it, but it has a texture to it that when you put work down, there's a little bit of a, how would I call it? It's like there's a little bit of resistance there because it's not a super smooth paper. It has a little bit of a fibery top to it. And I have a love-hate relationship with it because when you put the charcoal on it, you know, it's not entirely smooth, but it has the right consistency that lets me really push the charcoal into the paper. And it's almost like I'm staining the paper with the charcoal. Like it's not sitting on top anymore. Like it has become one with the paper. But because I'm like, you know, doing all of this kind of movement the whole time, the top of the paper really looks fuzzy. Like it's a really fuzzy kind of quality to it, which is, I find delightful, but might, you know, annoy a different person as they're working on it. But I also use charcoal pencils. And for those, I've typically used just like the General's brand. But I have started, as I've been working on the muslin, I have switched over to a different brand whose name I'm trying to remember right now. I'm going to say it totally wrong, but Faber-Castell. It's a darker pencil, and it doesn't come like the General's comes in like 2B, 4B, 8B, all of that, HB. But this other one is just soft, medium, and hard. And for some reason, that particular one works much better on the muslin than the General's does. I think it's because the binding agent they have in that pencil is a little bit smoother. And so it's softer to go onto the muslin. But after working on paper and then shifting to the muslin and doing like 2 to 3 drawings on the muslin, I've since gone back to paper to create a piece for a commission, and I was missing the muslin as I was working on the paper. And so I don't know what this means for my future, but for right now, I am continuing to sort of experiment a little bit more with the muslin and just seeing where that kind of takes me.
And you describe your work as graphite and charcoal when you
Yes.
Yeah. So
and
where does the graphite come in?
Yeah, so the graphite is both in the sort of getting the work onto the image. And I am not an artist who's going to grid out my work. I am an artist who projects. And so I will set up a projector and project onto my canvas or my paper just to get like the general feel of where things go. And I'll put a light pencil mark down to do that. And then I'll start going in with the charcoal to build up the layers. But sometimes on paper, if I wanted to push a tonal value just a little bit more, I would add a little bit of the graphite on top of the charcoal and just sort of push them together. And that would just give me a little bit more of a softer transition between some of the ones that are just like really in the middle of that kind of grayscale value.
Yeah, when you said that, like, you couldn't erase on muslin, like that kind of blew my mind. Like, if you said you just work slowly, and I guess if something doesn't look quite right, you just like lean into it, or do you?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like with the works I'm doing now, like I work much slower than I would if I was on paper. But if I do put a mark down, then I'm just like, well, that's there now. And so I have to just make it work. And so far it's been fine. And it's just, because it's my drawing. I can make it look like whatever I want it to look like. And so even if a mark is there that I didn't expect to be there, it can be there. It's allowed. It's my space and my rules. And so I think, again, my temperament of today, Erin at 41, is very different than when I was like 23 making those other muslin pieces. And so you just have to find the temperament that matches to the method.
Absolutely.
I have one more question. I know we're kind of at the end of our time. Actually, we're over our time, but I want to know. So I'm really obsessed with B.J. Clemens' work, where she's doing that like almost hyperrealism from the photograph, outer space, spider webs, and all these kind of things. And when I watched the Art 21 video on her, she's kind of going through this mantra of like, oh my God, I can't stop doing this. I wish I could stop, but I can't. And I wonder, how do you feel during the drawing? Is it really about the final product that you have to kind of go towards that, or is it like you enjoy the actual day-to-day dialogue with the paper or the muslin as you're working? I don't want to say is it really about the journey or the product, but is something along those lines? Just curious about that.
Yeah, I have also watched Via Salmons give beautiful sort of like interviews through videos, and every time I'm just like, I just want her to be like my art godmother and just like take me under her wing, because she just seems like such a cool character, and she makes these like intensely observed pieces of art that I want to know her. But I think when I've watched how she works, and then when I've read about what she's thinking about as she's making those pieces, I'm not as like transfixed by the process as she is. Like she's obsessive level, I think, with like how she's recreating those images. And for me, sometimes I'm definitely, trying to make a piece from a reference photo, and I'm losing my mind a little bit because I'm just like, I would just like this to be done. And I'm still working on this particular part, trying to get this particular thing looking just right. And so I'm not in like a joyful state the whole time I'm making a piece. But I found that, especially working with the muslin, like it's a different approach to making things. Just because of like how I'm putting down the marks, and like how there has to be like a lot more consideration about it, that I am sort of like transitioning more into a more joyful experience of like putting down the charcoal. And I don't know if it's just because there's been a shift in like how I have to work, and it's new and it's exciting and different, or if it's just that the material is just such a great combination of just this softness and this softness. And I no longer have that weird kind of, texture of the paper to work with that, always felt just a little bit abrasive on there. But yeah, but I'm a huge fan of Salmon's work, but I couldn't be at that level. And I'm not interested necessarily in recreating things to that degree. I fully embrace the wonkiness that is in all of my drawings. Like things are not perfect in my drawings. There is 100% a wonky character happening that I love in particular. And I think that because I'm not interested in it being so precise, that gets to exist there at the same time as sort of all these other kind of moments of some kind of precision or care or just like depth of observation. Yeah, so I think it's just a little bit different in like what our outcomes are that we want. But I wish that I was as transfixed with drawing as she is, because she's just, I mean, watching her videos, she is just in love with, you know, what she's drawing and painting, and that's just not me all the time.
I always felt that she hated it almost at a point. Like she
Ah.
wanted to tear it apart. Like, I can't stop doing this. Like, that seems miserable to me. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
We'll give you a mute round of applause.
Thank you so much, Erin. This was such a joy.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's time today and having the opportunity to come speak with y'all.
And hopefully you'll invite another incredible artist in your neck of the woods to present for us. I want to remind everyone really quickly, I hope I don't mess up her name. We have Melissa Uchiji coming next in 2 weeks. She's a she's an icon in the DC area, incredible artist, multimedia to the nth degree, but worldly renowned. Lots of very strange sculptures dealing with actually a lot of similar issues that Erin was talking about today with women's issues. So I really encourage you guys to come check her out. She's actually going to be hosting the next 2 following meetings after hers. So you'll get a lot of her next couple ACO events, but she is, we're really pleased to have her presenting for us. So check back in 2 weeks and then we'll see you then.
And one more thing, Jordan, if I could, we're essentially functioning as a nonprofit. So if anybody wants to give a donation, you can route it to Glen Echo with a notation to the ACO, because they're sponsoring us as a nonprofit. So we finally can accept your donations if you would care to make some, and to keep them for the ACO's growth. So thank you so much.
Throw more money at artists, which is our goal.
Right, exactly. We're committed to paying, some amount to the people who present and to the friends of the ACO who bring them in, including, for example, Dina. And we are so grateful to both of you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you in 2 weeks.
It was fantastic, Erin and Dana.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really.
Yeah,
fantastic.
thank you. This was great. I really appreciate it.
So we'll send you an email when the video is nicely edited by our one and only John Merrill. So he'll diligently get this video to be tip-top shape, and then we'll send you the copy of it.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a really wonderful thing to have to share with people.
You did excellent. It was awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool. Awesome. Well, take care.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.